China and Iran signed 20 agreements. This is TR News. Iran and China signed 20 agreements, according to Al Mayadeen English. The leaders of China and Iran agree to boost bilateral cooperation in the service of their mutual interests. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi visited Beijing on Tuesday, where he met his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping and signed 20 new bilateral cooperation agreements, as well as a memorandum of understanding. The Sino-Iranian meeting sought to discuss the implementation of a comprehensive strategic partnership between Tehran and Beijing. The bilateral cooperation agreements covered, according to Tasnim, fields namely economy, information technology, crisis management, tourism, fields, environment, international trade, intellectual property, agriculture, exports, health and medical sector, media activities, as well as sports and cultural heritage. Tasnim also reported that, according to the head of the Iran-China Chamber of Commerce in Tehran, Iran will establish a commercial office in China to promote economic dealings with Chinese businessmen. Sovereignty, integrity, cooperation. Jinping and Raisi, in a joint statement, held that they stand against foreign interference in the domestic affairs of sovereign states. In that regard, the two leaders vowed mutual efforts to protect the territorial integrity of both countries, China and Iran. Raisi, according to China Central Television, said both Iran and China are strongly against the policy of unilateral actions, hegemony, and bullying, as well as foreign interference in domestic affairs. In turn, Xi explained that Beijing will boost cooperation with Tehran in the service of mutual interests. China supports Iran in its effort to protect state sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and national dignity. It supports Iran in confronting the policy of unilateral actions and intimidation. China is also against the interference of foreign powers in Iran's domestic affairs, he said. Raisi, during his visit, also thanked China for its support throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as acknowledged Chinese efforts in the international area, specifically on matters pertaining to the Vienna talks. And from IFP News, Iran front page, Iranian and Chinese presidents hold talks in Beijing. Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi, in a meeting with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, said that the implementation of the strategic partnership agreement between Tehran and Beijing is a significant step towards stabilizing the region. President Raisi also said Iran's ready for the implementation of China's Road Belt project. The Iranian president noted that Iran and China are friends in tough times, and strengthening these bonds is conducive to regional and global security. Xi, for his part, said China firmly believes in expansion of ties with Iran. He also announced the Chinese government's readiness to support companies willing to invest in Iran. Xi said Beijing is resolved to deepen trade and agricultural cooperation with Iran. President Raisi, also in a meeting with the head of China's National People's Congress, thanked the powerful body for its support of the promotion of strategic ties between the two countries. During Raisi's two-day visit to Beijing, Iran and China signed 20 cooperation agreements in the presence of Raisi and Xi. Iran and China have been expanding ties in recent years. This has angered the U.S., which has repeatedly called on Beijing to stop buying oil from Tehran. China has rejected such calls, saying it will not allow other countries to meddle in ties with Tehran. Press TV. Raisi, consolidation of Iran-China ties, effective in promoting regional global security. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi says Iran and China are friends in hard times, stressing that further strengthening of relations between the two countries will contribute to the security of the region and the world. Raisi made the remarks in a meeting with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in Beijing on Tuesday, as he underscored the need for expansion of Iran-China ties in different economic, trade, scientific, and cultural areas, as well as the implementation of a strategic 25-year agreement between the two countries, which he said is pivotal to peace and stability in the region. Describing the visit by the politico-economic delegations of the two countries to each other's capitals and the negotiations between the sides as important and effective in developing bilateral relations, Raisi said, despite opposition from the enemies of the Islamic Republic of Iran and China to the consolidation and expansion of relations between the two countries, these relations have taken great strides thanks to the favorable management of the parties. Stressing that Iran and China are friends in hard times and friendship in tough times consolidates bonds in other days, Raisi said that the strengthening of such bonds and friendship is effective in promoting the security of the region and the world. He pointed to Iran's determination to expand the relations between the two countries based on mutual respect and noted the development of relations between Iran and China has been moving forward, but what's been done is far from what should be done, and to compensate for the lag, greater steps must be taken. The Iranian chief executive also welcomed Xi's emphasis on respecting the territorial integrity of the Islamic Republic, as well as confronting unilateral efforts in the international arena and interventionist measures across the world. The president also appreciated China's positive and constructive role in talks on removing anti-Iran sanctions. He also referred to the failure of European countries to meet their obligations, saying, Western countries once again made miscalculations about Iran. West still insists on Cold War era's wrong approach. The Chinese president, for his part, pointed to the development of China-Iran relations and said the implementation of the 25-year strategic partnership between the two countries is very effective in deepening and expanding their relations, adding, China firmly believes in the development of relations with Iran. Xi went on to criticize unilateralism and the bullying policies of Western countries at the international level, saying, unfortunately, these countries still insist on the wrong approach of the Cold War era, and this has inflicted damage of international norms and global peace and security. Supporting the territorial integrity of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Xi emphasized the need to confront unilateralism, foreign interference, and threats to security and stability in the region and across the world. Elsewhere in his remarks, Xi voiced the Chinese government's readiness to support the companies that are willing to invest in Iran, saying, the Chinese government is also fully prepared to expand cooperation in the field of trade and transit and cultural relations with Iran. Acknowledging the Islamic Republic's positions and measures in the fight against terrorism, Xi further underlined the need for implementation of the 2015 nuclear agreement as soon as possible and described the deal officially known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action as one of the achievements of multilateralism to resolve disputes. This from thecradle.co. Iran and China signed 20 cooperation agreements in Beijing. Over the last year, oil exports from Tehran to Beijing reached 12.6 million. Chinese President Xi Jinping received his Iranian counterpart Ibrahim Raisi on 14 February in Beijing, where the two signed 20 cooperation agreements to bolster relations between Iran and China. The two met at the headquarters of the National People's Congress of China to discuss improving bilateral cooperation in the fields of crisis management, tourism, communication, and information technology, trade, agriculture, exports, healthcare, media, sports, and cultural heritage. Raisi thanked Xi for the constructive support from the National People's Congress of China in advancing the strategic ties between Tehran and Beijing. Raisi described Iran and China as two friends in hard times, emphasizing the necessity of using the capacity of regional and trans-regional mechanisms regarding joint cooperation. Xi also affirmed his support for a proper resolution of the revival of the Iranian nuclear deal with Washington and expressed Beijing's support in safeguarding Tehran's rights and interests, according to the Chinese media. Xi further assured Raisi that China would continue to participate constructively in talks to resume negotiations on implementing the Iran nuclear agreement. After their meeting, the Iranian president told reporters that China and Iran have similar perspectives on fighting unilateralism at the international level. Last year, Iran was officially included in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a permanent member. The nation later applied to join BRICS, two international organizations in which China and Russia play a significant role. China remains Iran's largest trading partner and the leading buyer of its oil. Over the last year, oil exports from Tehran to Beijing reached 12.6 billion. Iran also plays a crucial role in the Belt and Road Initiative, a mega infrastructure and economic initiative launched by Beijing to link the economies of Europe, Asia, and Africa with an eye on expanding to Latin America. In 2021, both countries signed a 25-year strategic cooperation pact with political, strategic, and economic components. Raisi's visit to the Asian giant is part of his administration's Look to the East policy, which seeks to build alliances with non-Western world powers that bear similar political structures to Iran and oppose U.S.-led Western domination of international affairs. From MinaFN.com, this article reads, Bolstering Iran-China ties to help world security, Iranian president. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi said on Tuesday that Iran and China are friends of tough times, adding that further enhancement of relations between the two countries could help world security trends, reporting citing IRNA. The president made the remarks during a meeting in Beijing with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, stressing the need for expansion of relations between Tehran and Beijing in different economic, trade, scientific, and cultural areas. President Raisi said that the implementation of a strategic 25-year agreement between the two nations is pivotal to peace and stability in the region. He stressed the need to fight against unilateralist efforts in the international scene as well as interventionist measures all across the globe. The president also appreciated China's positive and constructive role in multilateral talks to remove sanctions on Tehran. Referring to the failure of European countries to meet their promises, he said that the Western countries once again made miscalculations about Iran. President Raisi appreciated the level of relations between Iran and China, while noting that further steps have yet to be taken. He also voiced Iran's readiness to help implement China's One Belt, One Road initiative. The Chinese president, for his part, underlined the need for implementing the strategic agreement between Iran and China, noting that his country strongly resolved to further enhance ties with Tehran. President Xi criticized the unilateral measures taken by Western countries in the international arena, regretting that these countries continue to insist on the Cold War approaches. He hailed Iran's stance in the fight against terrorism and stressed the need for a speedy implementation of a 2015 multilateral nuclear deal with Iran as an achievement of multilateralism to resolve the disputes. And from Newsmax World, China's Xi expresses support for Iran amid Western pressure. Chinese leader Xi Jinping expressed support for Iran during a visit to Tuesday by its president as Tehran tries to expand relations with Beijing and Moscow to offset Western sanctions over its nuclear development. The official Chinese account of Xi's meeting with Ibrahim Raisi gave no indication whether they discussed Russia's attack on Ukraine. Tehran supplied military drones to Russian President Vladimir Putin's government, but says they were delivered before the war began. Xi expressed support for Raisi's government in language Beijing uses to criticize Washington's domination of global affairs. China and Iran portray themselves alongside Moscow as counterweights to American power. China supports in safeguarding national sovereignty and resisting unilateralism and bullying, Xi said in a statement carried by Chinese state TV on its website. Xi and Raisi attending the sign of 20 cooperation agreements including trade and tourism, the Chinese government announced. Those add to a 25-year strategy agreement signed in 2021 to cooperate in developing oil industry and other fields. China is one of the biggest buyers of Iranian oil and a source of investment. Iran has struggled for years under trade and financial sanctions imposed by Washington and other Western governments over what they say is Tehran's efforts to develop nuclear weapons, an accusation the Iran government denies. The U.S. government cut off Iran's access to the network that connects global banks in 2018. U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price urged China to influence Iran and lower potential threats in the region, saying that would be in both of our interests. The PRC has a role to play in very clear signaling to Iran that its destabilizing activities, that its brinksmanship is not going to be rewarded. It's not going to be countenanced. It's not something that the international community is prepared to sit idly by and watch, Price said Tuesday to reporters in Washington, referring to China by its official name, the People's Republic of China. Xi said Beijing opposes external forces interfering in Iran's internal affairs and undermining Iran's security and stability, according to the government statement. It said Xi promised to work together on issues involving each other's core interests, but gave no details. Raisi's government didn't immediately release details of the meeting, but the president called the two governments friends in difficult situations in a commentary published Monday by the ruling Communist Party newspaper People's Daily. A Chinese foreign minister spokesperson asked whether Beijing was concerned that getting closer to Iran might complicate the U.S.-China ties, said their friend relations contribute to promotion of peace and stability in the Middle East. Our relations don't target any third party, said the spokesperson Wang Wenbin. And lastly, from Manila Times, we have a slightly different perspective. This is Iranian leader Raisi begins visit to China. Iran's president Ibrahim Raisi arrived in China on Tuesday for a 3-day visit, accompanied by a large delegation that includes his central bank chief and ministers for trade, the economy, and oil. Raisi will hold talks with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in the capital, Beijing, with the pair expected to sign a number of cooperation agreements, Tehran said. Iran and China have strong economic ties, especially in energy transit, agriculture, trade, investment, and in 2021, they signed a 25-year strategic cooperation pact. Both countries face pressure from Western nations over their positions on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which was launched almost a year ago, and Iran's already under huge U.S. sanctions due to its nuclear program. Iran's emerged as one of Russia's few remaining allies, as Moscow's been pushed deeper into international isolation over the invasion. Western countries have accused Tehran of supplying armed drones to Russia for use in the war in Ukraine, a charge it denies. Last December, Washington outlined what it said was an extensive relationship between Iran and Russia, involving equipment such as helicopters, fighter jets, drones, with the latter resulting in new U.S. sanctions. Moscow's offensive in Ukraine is a sensitive issue for Beijing, which has sought to position itself as neutral while offering diplomatic backing to its strategic ally. Raisi and Xi met for the first time last September at Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Uzbekistan, where the Iranian leader called for expanding ties. This is the first state visit by an Iranian president to China in more than 20 years. According to the state-run Islamic Republic news agency, Raisi will take part in meetings with Chinese businessmen and Iranians living in the East Asian country. China is Iran's largest trading partner, IRNA said. Citing the 10-month statistics of Iranian customs authorities, Tehran's exports to Beijing stood at $12.6 billion, while it's imported $12.7 billion worth of goods from China.
These are facts, they're numbers. You can quantify this.
Raisi is being accompanied by the country's foreign minister and ministers for the economy, for roads and transportation, for oil, industry, mining, and trade and agriculture, according to Iranian state television. His delegation also includes Ali Bagheri, Iran's deputy foreign minister for political affairs and nuclear negotiator. Chinese foreign minister spokesman Wang Wenbin said Raisi would meet with Premier Li Keqiang and top Chinese legislator Li Zhanshu. China and Iran enjoy traditional friendship, and it's the strategic choice of both sides to consolidate and develop China-Iran relations, Wang said. Beijing wants to play a constructive role in enhancing the unity and cooperation of countries in the Middle East and promoting regional security and stability, he added. Raisi's first visit to China comes days after he declared victory over the nationwide protest movements. And we'll pause there. That's offhand, and that's the part that seemed a little different and weird to me. So, watch this space, and we shall return with a bit more world news. And back to more world news. The U.S. withdraws human rights candidates over his criticism of Israel. James Cavallaro says State Department said decision due to his statements denouncing apartheid in Israel-Palestine. The Biden administration withdrew the candidacy of a leading rights activist Tuesday due to his criticism of Israel just days after nominating him to serve on a leading human rights panel. State Department spokesman Ned Price said the decision to withdraw James Cavallaro's nomination to serve as the commissioner of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights was made over his inappropriate past statements. His statements clearly do not reflect U.S. policy. They are not a reflection of what we believe, and they are inappropriate to say at the least, Price told reporters. Judging by some of the statements that have since been uncovered, it's fair to conclude, in fact it's true, that we're not aware of these statements and writings that he produced. Cavallaro, who has a long track record working in human rights, was informed of the decision during a meeting at the State Department on Tuesday morning. He said the decision was due to my statements denouncing apartheid in Israel-Palestine. Today, the State Department informed me that they were withdrawing my candidacy because of my view that the conditions in Israel-Palestine meet the definition of apartheid under international human rights laws, he wrote on Twitter. Cavallaro said he was asked to sign a joint statement withdrawing his nomination but declined to do so, as I played no part in making this decision and was ready to commit to another term as commissioner. On Friday, when it nominated Cavallaro to serve on the Organization of American States Commission from 2024 to 2017, from 2024 to 2027, the State Department hailed the activist as a leading scholar and a practitioner of international law with deep expertise in the region as well as the inter-American human rights system. He serves as the founder and executive director of the University Network for Human Rights, which trains undergraduate and graduate students in human rights, and held positions at Harvard, Stanford, and Yale law schools. He also served on the Rights Commission from 2014 to 2017. The Allgemeiner, a Jewish outlet based in New York City, published over the weekend an article in which they raised Cavallaro's past tweets that criticized Israel and support for the country among U.S. politicians, including Representative Hakeem Jeffries. Who's now the top Democrat in the House of Representatives. Jeffries, Cavallaro wrote in December, was bought, purchased, and controlled by pro-Israel groups. He was replying to an article about the lawmakers' acceptance of lobbying funds from the American Israel Public Affairs Committee and similar groups. The tweet and several others have since been deleted, and Cavallaro said he did so because I was so proactively and in good faith addressing concerns the State Department had raised during the vetting process about public expressions of my personal views on U.S. policy. Other tweets referred to Israel as an apartheid state, a reference to the rights abuses committed in South Africa, which activists say are mirrored in Israel and the occupied Palestine territories. Cavallaro also said Israel was responsible for atrocities. The Biden administration decision to axe Cavallaro's nomination draws stark parallels to a recent saga at Harvard University, in which a renowned human rights activist had an employment offer rescinded and then restated amid widespread criticism. The university's Kennedy School reversed course January 19 after initially denying a fellowship to Ken Roth, the man who led Human Rights Watch, HRW, for the 3 decades. The school's decision came after Dean Douglas L. Mendorf initially blocked Roth from receiving an illustrious 1-year fellowship at the school's Carr Center for Human Rights Policy. Roth led HRW since 1993 before recently retiring and has been dubbed the godfather of human rights by the New York Times. Elmendorf did not specify why he changed his mind, but said he had been in error. The withdrawal of my appointment comes on the heels of the Kennedy School withdrawal of fellowship offered to Ken Roth due to his advocacy for human rights in Israel, Palestine, a decision that's since been reversed, wrote Cavallaro. Censorship of human rights advocates who denounce apartheid in Israel also affects countless Palestinian academics, activists, and students who do not have the platform Ken Roth or myself have, he added. And again, that's AA.com, Anadolu Agency. And here's the original article that spawned this situation. A human rights activist who recently accused U.S. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries of being bought, purchased, and controlled by pro-Israel groups has been nominated by the U.S. government to a post with the Organization of American States. The candidacy of Professor James Cavallaro for a commissioner's post with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, an agency within the OAS, for the 2024 through 2027 term was announced on Friday by the State Department. Keep in mind, this article is what spawned the issue, so in it the language will make it seem as though, of course, his nomination had not been withdrawn, because it hadn't. Cavallaro, a co-founder and executive director of the University Network for Human Rights, was described as a leading scholar and practitioner of international law with deep expertise in the region, as well as the inter-American human rights system in a State Department release. However, a survey of Cavallaro's social media activity by the Allgemeiner revealed a multi-year history of incendiary posts critical of U.S. foreign policy, Israel, and pro-Israel elected officials. In one December 2022 tweet, now deleted, Cavallaro invoked language and imagery often associated with anti-Semitic claims of pro-Israeli political and financial control over U.S. domestic policies or politics. Bought, purchased, controlled. Cavallaro wrote alongside a link to an article about the funds raised for Representative Jeffries by IPAC and other pro-Israel groups. In other tweets, Cavallaro characterized Israel as an apartheid state and accused the U.S. and Israel of atrocities. Cavallaro began deleting the offending tweets from his timeline on Monday after the Allgemeiner reached out to him for a comment. A reply had not been received by press time. I think that's probably where he made his mistake, right? Is beginning to delete the tweets. Cavallaro teaches courses on human rights law and practice at Wesleyan University, Yale Law School, and UCLA Law School. And he's previously taught at the law schools of Harvard and Stanford. The University Network for Human Rights supervises interdisciplinary engagement in human rights practices at universities across the country and beyond, according to its website. Announcing him as the U.S. candidate for the IACHR seat on Friday, State Department Deputy Spokesman Vedant Patel said Cavallaro would bring valuable expertise to the Commission's work. But other posts from Cavallaro's social media feed express views consistently at odds with Biden administration positions. That I can understand as well. Not being in line with the administration that's appointing you is just not going to work. In February 2022, responding to Representative Ro Khanna's visit to Ramallah, where he met with Palestinian students, Cavallaro asked, "Did they say anything about high-level U.S. congressional delegations legitimating and praising the Israeli apartheid state?" Cavallaro has also promoted the views of Rania Khalek, a journalist and prominent anti-Israeli activist who is also a supporter of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. In April 2021, he tweeted at Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that she should watch one of Khalek's videos to help you figure out what and how is going on in Palestine. More from that later. We'll actually play that video. While the video is no longer available on Twitter, it appears that Khalek was promoting her video Two-State Delusion, Israel's a racist one-state nightmare, in which she claims that Israel's committing ethnic cleansing is not a democracy and does not belong in the effing 21st century. The IACHR is an organ of the Organization of American States and a regional body headquartered in Washington, D.C. that promotes security, democracy, and economic development in the Americas. While it focuses on the Western Hemisphere, in May 2021, Cavallaro asked why the OAS was labeling Hamas a terrorist organization and suggested that support for human rights was contrary to U.S. foreign policy. Substance aside, why does the OAS have a position on Hamas? He wrote, "If you're promoting global solidarity, how about supporting human rights instead of U.S. foreign policy?" While the IACHR, hold on, amazing. While the IACHR commissioner role is not a Senate-confirmed position, he's also made inflammatory comments about the character of both Democrats and Republicans, calling Senator Joe Manchin bought and paid for, and labeling Senator Susan Collins pedantic, self-righteous, and pompous, and to resign over her repeated moral failings. In November 2021, he wrote of Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana that "I don't know whether to call you senator or shameless mother effer." Actually, I do. Cavallaro's comments are similar to those that plagued the nomination of Sarah Margon, who withdrew her nomination to human rights post in the State Department in January over Republican objections to her anti-Israel comments, and to Neera Tanden, whose Twitter trolling of senators cost her the directorship of the Office of Management and Budget. The Algerminer reached out to Representative Jeffries, Senator Collins, Senator Manchin, Senator Kennedy, and the State Department, but they didn't immediately reply to the Algerminer's request for comment. Member states of the Organization of American States, OAS, will vote to fill 4 IACHR seats, including the one Cavallaro has been nominated to during elections at the June 2023 General Assembly in Washington, D.C. Commissioners serve in personal capacity and do not receive a salary either from the U.S. or OAS, but the OAS does provide them with a per diem when traveling on IACHR business. Ooh, hit you where the money is too. Very interesting. So here's, there was a mention of a video by Rania Kalik.
Is a mantra government officials repeat, knowing it's bullshit. The two-state solution for Israel and Palestine is a mantra government officials repeat, knowing it's bullshit.
We support a two-state solution.
Two states living side by side.
Two-state solution.
Two-state solution.
Two-state solution.
Two-state solution.
It was always a distraction so Israel could keep stealing more Palestinian land under the cover of an illusory peace process. It wasn't a solution so much as a delusion, and it worked. After decades of negotiating for two states, Israel is an apartheid state with little islands of Palestinian ghettos under Israeli control. That's how the supposed Palestinian state went from looking like this to looking like this. Disconnected Palestinian areas surrounded by Jewish settlements. Former Israeli leader and infamous butcher of Sabra and Shatila, Ariel Sharon, explicitly laid out the strategy, saying, "We'll make a pastrami sandwich of them. We'll insert a strip of Jewish settlement in between the Palestinians and another strip of Jewish settlement right across the West Bank, so that in 25 years' time, nobody will be able to tear it apart. Two states will never happen. Israel deliberately made that impossible. That's because Israel is a settler state built on the deliberate removal of 750,000 Palestinian natives in 1948, what Palestinians call the Nakba, or catastrophe, as part of a European colonial project driven by the ideology of Zionism, or Jewish nationalism. Wait, can I still say that, or did Facebook already ban criticism of Zionism at the behest of the Israeli government? The Zionist project to seize Palestinian land and expel Palestinians continues. But maintaining a Jewish majority requires denying the basic rights of non-Jews, as well as continuous ethnic cleansing, making so-called facts on the ground, that is, Jewish settlements, to physically block a Palestinian state. The two-state solution was already a usurpation of Palestinian rights, denying them the right to return to the towns from which they were cleansed in 1948, and relegating them to the remaining 22% of their original territory. By getting Palestinians to agree to a two-state solution that would never ever happen, the Israelis bought themselves time to change the facts on the ground for their pastrami sandwich. What actually exists is one state, with about 7 million Jews ruling over 6 million Palestinians. Despite the Israeli state policy controlling both groups, only one has full rights. So much for the only democracy in the Middle East. There are 1.6 million Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. They or their ancestors survived 1948. They're second-class citizens who face institutionalized discrimination, with 50 laws on the Israeli books that explicitly discriminate against non-Jewish citizens of Israel. Another 4.5 million Palestinians live in the West Bank and Gaza, under brutal Israeli military control for the crime of not being Jewish. They have zero civil rights. When elections take place in Israel, these people are excluded from voting for the government that controls their lives. Some 2.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank are walled off by Israeli separation barriers that snake across their neighborhoods, unofficially annexing Jewish settlements into Israel, while relegating Palestinian neighborhoods to exclusion zones, with separate roads and checkpoints that control their every movement. Gaza is an open-air prison where nearly 2 million people are under Israeli air, land, and sea blockade. Israel even regulates the caloric intake of each resident. Israel claims it ended the occupation of Gaza, but if you control who can enter and exit, imports, exports, airspace, and the sea, then you control the population. Palestinians have been shot by the hundreds for even approaching the high-tech border fence. Israel created the most sophisticated and effective mechanisms of control in the world, while everyone was distracted by two states. Liberals say two states is the only option because one state would mean Jews might be in the minority. This argument is straight up bigotry. Imagine we were talking about white and black people. It would be totally unacceptable for liberals to argue against giving black people rights because it would undermine whites as a majority. So why do we accept it with Israel-Palestine? We certainly wouldn't tolerate someone talking about the threat of a growing Jewish population, but Western officials routinely warn of too many Palestinian babies. So what if they're the majority? Either you support equal rights for all, or you don't. Even progressive American politicians are guilty of this overt racism.
Over time, realities are bearing down on Israel. Demographic realities, births and deaths, what the region looks like.
This is the same argument made in favor of apartheid South Africa. The same was argued in favor of segregation in the Jim Crow South. That to give black people equal rights would undermine white demographic rule and make white people less safe. The oppressor class fearing that the oppressed will do to them what they've done. Look, if your state requires demographic engineering to maintain an ethno-religious majority, then you're not liberal, you're not a democracy, and you don't belong in the fucking 21st century. When liberal is you're not engineering that the oppressed will do demographic rule Jim Crow South. That to give black people equal rights would undermine white demographic rule and make white people less safe. The oppressor class fearing that the oppressed will do to them what they've done. Look, if your state requires demographic engineering to maintain an ethno-religious majority, then you're not liberal, you're not a democracy, and you don't belong in the fucking 21st century. When liberal Israelis warn against right-wing policies, it's not based on human rights concerns, but because it'll harm Israel's image as a democracy, or because they're afraid their Palestinian subjects will one day be granted Israeli citizenship, and Jews will lose their privileges. The Israeli left warns that Israel will become an apartheid state. But it already is! It's already denying civil rights to non-Jews and bestowing the state's largest on Jews in illegal settlements. It already has one set of laws for Jews and another to subjugate non-Jews. South Africa wasn't a democracy that also practiced apartheid. It wasn't a democracy because it practiced apartheid. It granted some autonomy to townships and Bantustans, just as Israel lets the Palestinian Authority police its own people and deal with their sewage. If Israel wants to be a democracy, then it must end all discrimination in the territories it administers, which includes the West Bank and Gaza, and grant equal citizenship to the residents living between the Mediterranean and Jordan. But the Biden administration is sticking by this two-state charade. Not only does Israel get to keep stealing Palestinian land, it gets to keep the Syrian land it stole too.
Will your administration, the Biden administration, continue to see the Golan Heights as part of Israel?
Look, leaving aside the legalities of that question, as a practical matter, the Golan is very important to Israel's security as long as Assad is in power in Syria.
Does this mean Israel's going to be pro-Assad? Assad now? You know, legal issues aside, I can steal your car now because keeping it for myself makes me feel safe. If the Biden administration was serious about peace, they'd be honest. But they can't do that. Israel's an important arm of American imperialism in the region.
It is the best $3 billion investment we make.
They'd be honest.
The best
can't do that. Israel's an important arm of American imperialism in the region.
It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
Israel's a client state that enforces American hegemony onto its neighbors through bullying and war. It was the first sectarianized country imposed on the Middle East, and its creation reshaped the entire region, setting it on a course for conflict, war, and chaos up until today. And there are the powerful pro-imperialist lobbying groups that police American politicians on this issue. There's even a book about it that, of course, made the lobby go mad. So Palestinians will continue living in misery as non-citizens in Israel and in multi-generational refugee camps all across the Middle East. Also, Israel can have its ethno-supremacist state. A Palestinian whose dad was kicked out of his home in 1948 or 1967 can't even enter the country, while a Jewish American from Brooklyn with zero ties to the Middle East beyond some ancient fairy tale can be gifted Palestinian land tomorrow and get a free house, healthcare, education, and guns. The irony is this is being maintained by a woke administration, promoting itself as being opposed to racism. America prides itself on democracy, yet here it is arming a Jim Crow settler apartheid state to the tune of over $3 billion a year, while feeding us lies about a future peace that will never be. So how much longer are we going to pretend that there's a two-state illusion at the end of this tunnel? How much longer until those who claim to be liberal support the obvious solution? One state with equal rights for all. If the past is a guide, then Palestinians face a bitter future.
Okay, one more story on this matter. This is by Zoe Khalid, nominee who called Biden a senile gaffe machine, withdrawn by State Department. This is GlobeEcho.com. The State Department on Tuesday withdrew the nomination of an Ivy League professor who called then-candidate Joe Biden a senile gaffe machine and criticized other officials for the pro-Israel views. I really like that clip by Rainey Akalik on Biden, by the way. I didn't know that these would be in synchronicity as they are now. Professor James Cavallaro was nominated last week to serve on the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights in the Organization of American States, but the State Department's link to the announcement no longer works, and spokesman Ned Price told reporters Tuesday that the nomination was withdrawn after his Cavallaro's past controversial tweets were discovered. State Department mocked for a State Department nominee who called Biden a gaffe machine was withdrawn on Tuesday. His statements clearly do not reflect U.S. policy, Price said. They're not a reflection of what we believe, and they're inappropriate to say the least. We've decided to withdraw our nomination of this individual. We were not aware of these statements and writings that he produced, Price acknowledged. Cavallaro's past remarks were first reported by the Al-Ghamainer, a nonprofit news organization that covers the Middle East, Israel, and matters of Jewish interest around the world. That outlet found the 2020 tweet that criticized that candidate Biden and several others, all of which Cavallaro has since taken down. The nominee's controversial comments were noticed by the State Department during the vetting process. Another one of his tweets criticized House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries as being bought, purchased, and controlled by pro-Israel groups. In another instance, Cavallaro described Israel as an apartheid state. Cavallaro put up a new Twitter thread on a Tuesday that said the state had informed him that it was this last tweet that disqualified him from serving on the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Today, the State Department informed me that they were withdrawing my candidacy because of my view that the conditions in Israel-Palestine meet the definition of apartheid under international human rights law. Biden struggled with crowds during his campaign, during his presidency. He also said he removed many of his previous tweets because he was proactively and in good faith addressing concerns the State Department had raised during the vetting process. Cavallaro also argued that his nomination would not have affected U.S. policy on Israel, and he said that his removal from the process would deprive the commission of a committed, experienced advocate for human rights in the Americas. Okay, watch this space, and we'll be back with Al-Aqsa news. Also, don't forget that your engagement through a like, share, and subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. Engage.